To use a tray of watercolors, you just have to get some water on your brush, gently wake up that watercolor paint, and then once your brush is full of color, you're gonna scrape it into one of the wells in your mixing tray. And if you run out of color, or if you run out of liquid in the color, you can just add a little bit more water and then mix up a little bit more paint and scrape that into the mixing tray. You never want to take color directly out of the watercolor tray and put it onto your paper because it's not going to be the right consistency, right? So instead, once you've got the color in your mixing tray, you're going to fill up your brush with a bunch of water and scrape that water into the tray also. And then I've got some really beautiful paint ready to go. So our first technique is glazing. And for glazing, we're gonna play around with painting one color on top of another. So I am just gonna start off by doing 3 lines. And I've got my messy mat underneath, so I don't have to worry about getting paint on the table. In order for the glazing technique to work, I need my first layer of paint to be completely dry so that when I put the second layer of paint on top of it, you can see through those 2 colors to create a new color, but they don't actually mix, right? We don't want the 2 different colors to mix. We want them to just lay on top of each other without mixing. So I'm gonna let these 3 lines dry. And I'm gonna move over and start working on value. I'm gonna start off by creating a very, very light value. And the way that I'm gonna do that is by adding just a little bit of pigment or paint from the tray and then mixing it with a lot of water. So with watercolors, white is actually just clear water, right? You wanna make sure that your water is clear so that it doesn't change how your paint looks. But the more clear water you add, the more you can see through to the white of the paper. So I've got a very, very light blue mixed up, and I'm gonna paint one of my shapes with that lightest value that I made. Now to make a medium value, I'm just gonna add a little bit more of the blue pigment to my paint. So I already have a light blue. If I add more of the blue paint, it's gonna make it into a medium blue. And I can sort of test it out first. And if I feel like there's not enough of a difference between the 2, that just means I need to go back and mix in some more of the blue. And then once I'm happy with that color, I'm gonna paint my next shape at medium shade. I've got some puddles or beads of paint that are sitting on the top of my paper, and I don't want that little puddle of paint to accidentally get smeared or drip onto a different part of my paper. So before I move on, I am going to scrape all of the water out of my brush. You can even dry it off on your messy mat. And then this brush is gonna act like a straw to pick up that extra paint. So I still have my medium blue, But now I don't have any puddles that are gonna get in the way. I'm gonna leave my last shape white to show the lightest shade on the value scale. And I'm gonna let these two shapes dry, and then I'll come back to it to paint the background, the darkest shade. While I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm gonna start painting in the precise shapes. As I'm painting in my precise shapes, if I get outside of the lines a little bit and the paint is still wet, I can pull that color away by adding a little bit of water first to make it lighter, and then using my dry brush to wipe up. So you have to do that immediately, but now that little orange part is a little bit lighter, it'll be easier for me to paint over it with a different color. The next step for all of these techniques is going to be that I do wet paint on dry paper. So I need to wait until my paper dries completely. That means I don't see any shiny puddles, and also when I touch it, it doesn't feel damp or cool. If the paint part feels like a cooler temperature than the paper, that means that it's still wet.